Welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. Today, I'm speaking with performance coach and director at PropelPerform, Grant Jenkins. Thanks for tuning in to episode 107 of the Pacey Performance Podcast. So today I have the pleasure in speaking with Director of PropelPerform and Performance Coach Grant Jenkins. So Grant comes to us from Brisbane, and in this episode we discuss everything from Grant working for himself and the kind of process he went through to decide that was the way forward for him. We discuss job titles, which is definitely amusing. I'm sure you'll enjoy that a little bit. And then we get on to warm-ups and a few different things that I'm sure you'll enjoy from Grant. So just before we get going, I just want to again introduce Ethan, who is going to be discussing teaching the Olympic lifts as part of the Coach Me Plus Sports Science Minute. So massive thanks to Coach Me Plus for sponsoring the episode today, and huge thanks again, as always, to Valve Performance, creators of the Nord board, for also sponsoring the episode today. So I'll get straight over to Ethan, who'll talk us through teaching Olympic lifts, and then we'll get straight into the episode with Grant. Speak soon.
In this Sports Science Minute, I want to have a brief discussion on teaching weightlifting movements. There's really two camps to this, the first one being teaching from the ground up, and then the second one being teaching from the top down. I've kind of learned both ways. I don't know if there's a right or a wrong answer. It really should depend on how your athletes are progressing through learning the weightlifting movements. A lot of the really advanced Russian weightlifters, they really think that the best way is to go from the bottom up, because if you can't pull it a weight, a snatch or a clean off the ground, clearly you're not going to probably be able to finish the exercise, or it's going to be really ugly as far as the technical aspect goes, or you could possibly miss the lift. And there is some merit to that. One of my mentors, Dr. Mike Stone, he always, when we were going from the floor, always referred to it as it's really a push through the floor. Nick Winkelman has mentioned that in a lot of his external cues. Instead of saying something like pull on the bar, it's you push through the floor. But when you're teaching from the ground up, one of the cues that I learned was knees back. So when the bar is on the floor, go knees back, and then that brings you to the right below the knee or right at the top of the knee. And then you go knees forward, which brings you into the power position, and jump and shrug. And that finishes the movement to the catch of some sort. Another cue that I've heard is from Joe Ken with Carolina Panthers, and he refers to it as push, jump, punch. Again, those are external cues. You can use them however you want. Really, this is just a discussion around different ways to teach the weightlifting movements. I've also learned from the top down, which starts at the mid-thigh position. You master mid-thigh through different weightlifting derivatives like full extensions and high pulls, and then into full cleans and full snatches. Once you're proficient at that technically, you can move on to right at the top of the knee. If you really want to break it down even more, once you master at the top of the knee, you can go to below the knee, and then from the floor. So there's a ton of different variations you can do here with the weightlifting movements. I think the big thing that is best for the coach is to see how your athletes are progressing. I progressed a little quicker in getting to the mid-thigh position and the power position, and finishing my lifts and my pull when I was learning from the top down. But obviously, I was able to feel more comfortable pulling off the floor when I was learning to pull off the floor. So try that with your athletes, and I hope it helps.
Thanks for tuning in to the Pacey Performance Podcast. So today we have Grant Jenkins coming all the way from Brisbane. So welcome to the podcast, Grant.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me.
No worries, mate. So I was going to I asked you what your job title was, and there was a little bit of silence, and I was, no, bin it, no job title. Let's have a little chat about job titles, because you've been on Twitter and voiced your opinion on the job title, and I'd love to get your opinion on where job titles are going in strength and conditioning in the industry. Don't know what that means, but in the industry.
Yeah, Rob, I think that's a funny one. I think Darren Roberts also has some pretty funny opinions on it. You know, we sort of, in our own little bubble, we human performance managers and high performance this and directors of athletic, whatever it is. But take us out of that world, and we're just the fitness guy. That's all we are. To most people, to our athletes, to the coaches, to the administrators in our national and state sporting organizations, just the fitness guy. And it's funny. I just don't know what I am really. You know, to some of my athletes, I guess I'm a bit of a big brother. And other athletes, I'm more of a dad. And then others, you know, I might be a strength coach, and it's how I fit into the sort of the overall program. And so you've heard that saying, those who matter do not care, and those who care do not matter. I kind of subscribe to that. That's my starting point. And, from there, who cares? And most of these things, you know, a chiropractor or physiotherapist is pretty well... they've got a definite realm that they work within, and with all of us pulling in different directions, I don't think it does our cause any. It doesn't help us in any way, and so I'm not overly fussed by it, and I just go with, I think physical preparation coach, maybe. I guess I don't know. Mm-hmm. Having said all that, sorry, I'm going on. I do think strength and conditioning does limit us a little bit in terms of, it's not only strength and conditioning, there's a whole bunch of things there. But until we agree on one uniform thing, and until we standardize it, who actually cares? It's just the fitness guy.
So is there, we have a thing over here, and it's pretty over there as well, kind of bashing the UKSCA or the ASCA equivalent, and many people saying that, like the physios, it should be a protected term, and there's obviously some backlash from that from the UKSCA because of the logistics and red tape around doing that. But is that ever something that you can see happening in the industry that we're in?
Look, I do think strength and conditioning is limited. It really is. I'm not really sure. It's really a battle, I think, for people who really care. I'm happy for them to take that battle. From what I understand, and I might be a bit biased because I do a fair amount of stuff with the ASCA here, but I think it's pretty positive here in terms of the relationship between coaches and the ASCA. They run a fantastic conference at the end of the year. And I think for the most part, it is a fairly positive relationship between the coaches and the organization. And but as I said, I try care, but I really don't. And I've played around with it for a while, and I kind of just said, man, I'm being an idiot with these highfalutin titles, and I've just kind of get on with working with my athletes, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So with your experience, I mean, I know you were doing some coach education today, but what is your experience? Well, what is your kind of oversight currently of the state of the industry and the coaches that you see pass through the ASCA system?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I used to start off, Rob, with I'd talk about in the beginning of a level 1 or level 2 about the importance of developing your network, and I hate that term, but it's a commonly accepted term. And developing it, and you would have. I've got an article on my blog where there's a talking about it's not what you know, it's not who you know, it's who knows you. And I see Vince Kelly has just posted something about it's also who knows what you know. And I used to talk a lot about that because when I first started doing these ASCA level 1, level 2, there was a big drive for people who wanted to be employed in the AFL, in the NRL, in the EPL, and the Super Rugby. That was sort of the main pathway of strength and conditioning. And what I've noticed over the last 2 or 3 years is that people aren't as interested in going that way. I think CrossFit, there are some benefits to CrossFit, and one of those are people are training in their own facilities. I've got my own one myself, and I've got no desire to be employed anymore. I'm self-employed, and that's the path I'm going. And the network side of it, that sort of little speech or monologue that I used to start off with, is becoming less and less relevant. And over the last 2 or 3 years, I've almost sort of cut it out. Whereas I'm sure, when you were starting out, it was important who you knew and to progress like that. And that's how it was, especially when I moved to Australia in 2003. But now it's not. I've got this little facility, 90 square meters, and we've got world champions training there in a variety of sports. We've got probably maybe 6 or 7 Australian representatives from BMX, mountain biking, squash, people who've represented Australia for tennis. And that's just in one small little facility, and I'm sure there's many of them there. So for a lot of us to get our sort of high performance kicks and really challenge ourselves from a periodization, programming, planning perspective, we don't need to be employed anymore. To work at the top end, you can work with these athletes privately in your own space. And so I've just noticed that sort of over the last 2 or 3 years, people aren't interested. They're not interested in being employed. They're making enough money, and they're by themselves. So that's just one little thing that I've noticed. Is something similar in the UK happening like that?
So do you actively seek out these athletes in your own facility, or is that a byproduct of just your name getting out there, and you actually the 95% of people that you train in your facility are general pop?
Oh yeah. So I'm a bit of a fan of Nassim Taleb. I'm guessing a few people have read his work, Anti-Fragility, Black Swan, that kind of stuff. And I like his idea of the barbell principle. And basically what you're looking at is I try to focus on the 2 extremes of the barbell in terms of the population. I have a very small percentage of high-performance athletes, and a large proportion of my clients are general population. So we run boot camps, and we run, whatever, just sort of basic PT stuff. And I try to keep that proportion roughly 20%, 80%. So a small proportion are high performance because they take up a lot of my time and the programming. And right now I've got BMX in the US and a couple of tennis players in Asia, and we're on Skype and we're on WhatsApp and we're communicating and training and all that kind of stuff. Whereas my PT clients probably don't get that level of service. And so I've got to keep that balance, especially from a financial point of view and from I suppose a mental point of view. And yeah, it's all been word of mouth. I'm actually trying to develop more the PT side of it, working with health clients and general population. But I've just found with the athletic population, and you guys would know this totally, if one athlete starts showing some success, a lot of their peers are asking, what are they doing differently? Let's try to do the same sort of thing. And so starting off with one BMXer, I now have 17. Same things happen with my mountain bike. Are you there?
I'm here, mate. Yeah, I'm here, mate.
Oh, sorry. So it just grows, and I feel like it has grown because the athletes are, if they've got a slight high performance mindset, they are chasing, whatever the magic or the difference, and so it's easier to spread amongst the athletic population than it is through the general population. So I suppose to answer your question, it's I haven't done any marketing or try to chase. I'm actually trying to go the other way and try to build up my boot camps and my PT stuff.
Mm-hmm. So this is one thing that I chatted to Darren Roberts about last week, and it's something that if anyone's listened to the episode already, because it came out the other day on his birthday, all days.
72.
Yes, about just about the kind of freedom and actually thinking about yourself as well as your athletes. And I'm guessing that you obviously went down the path of not aiming to be employed by a sports team, but giving yourself that freedom, that kind of, I suppose, financial freedom and personal freedom to set up your own facility. But anyone that's interested in going that route, what kind of capital was needed to actually get that up and running? And what had you done before then to give you the foundations to be able to give yourself enough credibility to not only get the athletic population, but easy enough the general population?
Okay, so the first one, I don't have a very good answer. I'm actually based out of a rugby club. Okay. And so my capital outlay was very low. I've got some of my own equipment that I've just collected over the years, a few barbells, a set of Eleco plates, good ham raise, and I just struck a deal with the club where I get priority access over certain times and they get access over certain times. I'm employed by the club to work as a bit of strength and conditioning, and we set up some intern programs and stuff like that. So there's a bit of a give and take from that side. Rob, financially, I'm very conservative. I'm very, I'm probably not, when it comes to finance, especially since I've got 2 kids and a mortgage and so forth, I spend a lot of time protecting what I've got. So it didn't take a lot to outlay, but I was involved in the purchasing of the equipment, and for just under 20 grand, we've got a facility that, as I mentioned, has got a number of, a full range of people, I guess, from general population to junior development athletes to high performance athletes. And I keep things very basic. It's, we squat, we deadlift, some might do some cleans, we do some single leg work, we do some posterior chain stuff, and we do a push and a pull. And a few other things. So it's very basic and it caters to everyone. I think one of the things that I'm really happy with is because it's a sort of a bit of a dingy rugby gym, the level of client that comes in, and I'm talking about the general population, the PT side of it, they're not looking to be pampered. They can't be. It's not that kind of gym. So I get to work with just real people who want to get stronger, maybe improve their 5K time or, lose a few kgs. But they've got the right mindset and something that I can identify with. They're just sort of simple people that set some goals and I'm going to help them achieve it. So keeping that has been sort of a really nice side effect of having things so simple and so basic in the gym is that no one comes in with any airs and graces because we all sort of in this little 90 square meter sweat box. Although in February this year we had an air conditioner. One of the club sponsors was an air conditioning company, so they chucked in an aircon, which is much appreciated, but never sought after. Nice. To answer part B of that question, I think it just evolved really. I never went. I intentionally was trying to get out of high performance. I was with Tennis Australia, and it took me about 2 years to sort of exit from there, with the goal of setting up my own facility. And I started working with Skate Australia. And Skate Australia look after a whole bunch of anything on wheels, small wheels, so roller derby and inline skating and skateboarding. And I think this is a pretty common theme as well. Because I've been working with them, I had an approach from a BMXer, and sort of that extreme / action sports mindset, and they probably trusted me a little bit. And then that started to build, and then because I had BMXs, then motocross started to contact me, and then because I've had that, then mountain bike started to contact. So it really grew organically from all that, and it wasn't anything that I chased. In fact, as I said, I was trying to shun it. But they're just awesome athletes that I work with, and I think that's just makes it easy to get up, and because they are each one of them are paying me to be there. So it's an awesome part of the job.
So for something like a BMXer, for instance, what's the process? What's the process that you went through with your first guy to look at demands of the sport and provide a service that meets those demands? What was that process? What that process looked like, and then what was the outcome?
All right. So to understand that process, I suppose I've got to first explain my philosophy. So anyone who comes into the gym, I have 3 stages that they're going through. First stage is healthy person. So we do some assessment, some testing, if you will, that make sure that very basically they can move adequately, that there's no real glaring imbalances between left and right, they've got decent coordination, hip mobility, basic strength, body awareness, all that kind of stuff. And depending on what program they're coming from, the healthy person can be anything from a couple of sessions to, close to 6 months if someone's coming back from an injury, or I suppose 9 months from an ACL. So that's my first goal, and I'm quite upfront about that we're not going to do any BMX-specific, mountain biking-specific, squash-specific training. We're just trying to get them to be a healthy person, move well. Second phase of that is then a healthy athlete. And this, again, depends on their background and a whole number of factors, but it's from healthy person to healthy athlete. Now I want them to be a little bit more explosive. For my developmental athletes, I want to give them the opportunity that if they quit their sport and pick up another sport, I feel like they could go okay. That they're not just limited to being on the bike or limited to whatever they've been doing. So we go healthy athlete and just general athleticism. So that's hopping, jumping, crawling, pushing, pulling, all those kind of movements. And then from there, then we start talking about a healthy sports person. And so healthy person, healthy athlete, healthy sports person. That's when we start getting into the specificity of things. So because I started working with younger BMXers, many of them are still on that healthy person / healthy athlete phase. I've only got a few that are really, and they've taken some time to develop. And so if you understand that, then there was no real pressure for me to understand the demands of the sport because I just wanted them to be healthy. But having understood that and understanding the philosophy of that, I did spend a fair amount of time on YouTube, just seeing coaching videos, track videos, GoPro videos, anything I could to understand not only the physical demands, but the mental space that a lot of these athletes in. And to give you an idea, Rob, so the elite BMXers that we've just had state champs 2 weekends ago, the elite guys start off an 8-meter hill, and at the bottom of the hill, within about 2.3 seconds, they're hitting 64, 65 Ks an hour. And I've been at the top of that hill, and if you find a GoPro video of this, you'll see that this particular hill, when you're at the top, you don't actually get to see the whole hill because it kind of fades away.
Right.
And these guys have to accelerate through that, and then they hit a jump, and they're probably traveling 10 meters in the air. So this was more important, less from a physiological point of view, but to understand these are the kind of athletes that I'm dealing with. That, again, if you mention Darren Roberts again, he's getting way too much airtime on this one. But if we mention Darren Roberts again, you see, he's got the hashtag herding cats and so forth. And that's, that's what we're doing. These are different personalities. And but getting back to your question, I wanted to understand them as a sport or as an individual before I was really too concerned. And that process of getting them to be a healthy person. And you got to remember, so I've got an 11-year-old BMXer who twice this year has broken his arm and broken his collarbone. Broken his collarbone once and broken his arm once. And what are we, 10 months into the year? He's 11 years old. So injuries are a massive part of this, these sports. But yeah, so YouTube was massive for me. Going out and watching training, watching competition, and then talking to their coaches. So one of the things that I've sort of set up is each of my athletes, I have a athlete, sometimes the parent, and definitely their coach. We have a little WhatsApp group. You know, the what do you call it? Text message.
Yeah.
WhatsApp. So we have a little coaching group there, and that way, you know, the coach can film training, put it up there. I can film what's going on in the gym. Anytime they get some good numbers, you know, push-ups or whatever, vertical jump, it gets posted on there, how they're feeling. And then we're all on the same page. So I've got probably like 22 or 23 of these WhatsApp groups where I send information and receive information. And that's been very helpful. The coaches have been really good about embracing me from, without a history in these sports and sort of taking me on and educating me. And so, you know, I've just been able to be very sort of privileged to have those kind of people to be surrounded with, so I can have a chat and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Does it make sense to your paradigm? So
do you have a similar structure? Obviously, it's going to differ with regards to the kind of terminology of these phases. But do you have a similar phase structure for the general pop athletes or general pop guys? Obviously, not athletes, general pop guys. That they come in, they do certain things, that they tick certain boxes. Some will move on, some will stay put.
Yeah, but we pretty much just don't have that third phase. So the first phase. Is just going through the motions. But you know what, Rob? Like, if you teach people to squat properly, which is part of it, maybe some scapular retraction on some rowing exercise, some lunging and making sure their hips are, you know, stable. It's amazing. One of my catchphrases, and you'll hear me say this 1,000 times: healthy hips, healthy athlete. Adapted to healthy hips, healthy person. You look after that kind of stuff. Suddenly back injuries and fatigue and pain starts to disappear. Those knee injuries and niggling things start to disappear. And so by taking care of that healthy person and just teaching them really good technique and lifting and getting a bit stronger, we see that they sort of shuffle along that continuum to a healthy weight loss, healthy 5K run or whatever their goals are.
Mm-hmm. So what have you learned from? I'm taking this phrase from Jeremy Shepherd, which I thought was cool as hell. What have you learned from the dude sports that maybe transferred into the general pop and the tennis guys or soccer guys or whatever it may be, the guys that you work with? What have you learned from them dude sports?
Okay, so it's funny. So a few years ago, I'm working with Tennis Australia, and we're down in a little town near Melbourne called Traralgon, and they have this tournament there every year. It's a lead up to the Australian Open, and I was working with a bunch of junior athletes, and I'm a well-paid strength and conditioning coach with maybe 4 or 5 tennis players. Some of these guys are some of the best in the world, and we're going through whatever we're doing, dynamic warm-ups or whatever, and preparing them for the match. And right next to these tennis courts was a skate park / BMX park. And this is, I'm talking about 2008, 2009. And I remember looking back at these guys who were all skating and BMXing and whatever. No coach, no warm-up, no activation drills, no periodization, no 3-year plan on their athletic ability, no recovery, no KPIs. And I just remember thinking, what the hell are we doing? Like, these guys were self-motivated. They were there on their own volition, their own accord. They, pushing each other. They had a great atmosphere. If one person tried something, someone else would try better it. And I just thought, in this sort of almost bleached world of high-performance sport where we're trying to take what the top guys do and mix it into development, I just remember that being a real clear thought of like, what the hell am I doing with these guys? Because I think those athletes on the skate ramp and the BMX park were better than the athletes I was trying to produce or develop. So in terms of learning, like I just think that, one thing is, if we understand the difference between top down and bottom up. Top down is when the coach stands there and tells us what to do and tells the athlete, you guys have to do this. And bottom up is when it just happens organically. Often applied to, political systems and stuff like that. And I just think that so many sports have gone this top-down, adult-led, coach-driven type of paradigm where, I've got people who are, no one's making anyone come to see me for strength and conditioning. They're just doing it on their, because they want to improve. There's no one telling them that they have to do this. And I just think that in a lot of our sports that we've got, especially the sort of more mainstream sports that we see on the week, every weekend on TV, they're just taking adult programs and just cookie cutting them onto junior athletes. And I just think we don't need to do that. Like, because of our own KPIs as state managers or whatever, coaches or whatever, we feel we have to do this. And I just love the free spirit. And yet there's still an intensity. Don't get me wrong. These guys are not shirking their training or anything like that. These guys are training, if not harder, just as hard as these professional athletes. But they're doing it with a spark in their eyes, a sort of a love in their hearts, just a freedom in their minds. And I think, I don't think traditional sports can go back to that. I'm sure they couldn't. There's just too much money, there's too much invested, and we're too far down the path. But on a much smaller scale, if I was working again and I was employed, I'd be looking at that skate park, that BMX park, and saying, how can I create that for my own athletes in my rugby league club or my cricket club or my school sport? And how do I get these athletes to be so inspired and so challenged and so driven without an adult, sort of with a whip standing above them? How can I recreate that? That's what I'd be looking at.
So how would you go about that if you could go back 10 years and do it all again?
If I had to do it all again, say with tennis or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what? It's interesting. So I was at Tennis Australia for 5 years. And Rob, for the first 3 years, we were mainly left alone. I had a very strong head coach who I had a great relationship with, and we had a very similar philosophy. And the philosophy was working mainly with developmental athletes. If we can get them to love the sport and learn to train hard, that's all we can really control. We know that to produce a champion is an outlier. So we said, let's just control and let's just make training engaging and fun, and it was. We had athletes who were doing more than they needed to. But then the last 2 years, some things changed, and I think, with the investment, Tennis Australia needed to see some KPIs and make us measure things and test things. And we actually had to test every single athlete twice a year or 4 times a year or something like that. And it was amazing. It had a massive effect, because now it went from doing things for fun or because they're a challenge to doing them because someone external is making us. And if I had to change one thing, I think I should have been stronger. I should have pushed back harder, because there's nothing that happens in my facility now that is not beneficial for the athlete. I don't do anything to tick a box. I never say that term, tick a box. And yet a lot of my colleagues, we did a beep test to tick a box. We did this. I don't really believe in it, but I had to do it to tick a box. We don't do that. We just say, what does the athlete need? And let's provide that. So, I have sessions in the gym where it's just a stretch. I have sessions in the gym where it's just a chat. There's some tears, maybe a cuddle. But it's what the athlete needs, and nothing else, nothing external affects that. And if I feel, I've actually lost a few athletes, especially, I've lost 3 athletes, 2 of them returned, who had parents who I didn't agree with what they were doing. And I said, guys, this is not acceptable, and I'm not going to train like this. And so they left, and 2 then came back, and 1 hasn't. And I'm comfortable with that. I'm very comfortable with that, because I know that everyone who's with me wants to be with me. And I know that the athlete's there because they want to be. If I suspect that mom and dad are pushing them to do something, well, then we have a chat. And if they continue to do it, then they leave. And so that'll be one thing, is just really finding the fun and just doing what is necessary for the athletes, and finding that love of the sport that many of the athletes that I'm working with have already. And not trying to put out that fire by doing too much or ticking boxes.
Just going to take a very quick break in the episode with Grant. In part 2, you can look forward to Grant discussing warm-ups, and I give a little bit of an insight into my experiences as an S&C coach during warm-ups, and it's been the first thing that kind of gets put on a young strength coach, and how that's kind of dealt with, or in my case, not dealt with. But just before we get into part 2, I just want to reiterate the thanks I'm going to give to Coach Me Plus and Val Performance, makers of the Nordboard, for sponsoring the episode today. So without them guys, it definitely won't be able to carry on doing this podcast. So make sure you check them both out. I'll get back into part 2 with Grant. I hope you enjoy, and I will speak to you soon. Just want to move on a little bit, and I basically stalked your blog and went through all the posts and had a little read again of some of the stuff that I'd read and had a little chuckle about 9 months ago. And one thing that came into my mind was the warm-up, and it made me think about 5-6 years ago when I started, and at a football club, soccer club. And the first thing that was kind of the big step was, Rob, can you do the warm-up for me today? And it was one of them, oh shit, I'm going to break everyone, everyone's not going to be ready. And it was the first kind of rite of passage to, we kind of trust you a little bit, and give me the opportunity to do the warm-up with the first team lads, which was an interesting one. It just brought me back to that situation, and got me thinking that, and just wanted your thoughts on the warm-up. And you've mentioned it there with the skateboarders, and that there's no warm-up for them guys. They just get on the board and off they go. How do you kind of cope with that with them guys? And is there any re-education there? And how does that then feed into the other athletes in the traditional sports and the general pop guys and girls?
So I think from the warm-up point of view, as I said, and this is probably the second or third time I'm really saying it, healthy hips, healthy athletes. So because I say it so much, I emphasize it a fair amount, and it's sort of hammered into my athletes that's what we do. That's sort of a non-negotiable. What that looks like, however, is very individual specific, not so much from a point of view of the exercise, but maybe how it's done. So, for example, some people have a more structured warm-up where I'm kind of saying, hey, 3 sets of 10 and 2 sets of 8 or whatever, hold this position. Whereas some of them are, I just need you to get under the hurdle and over the hurdle a few times, and we kind of, they just sort of play a little game about the hurdle is meant to be electrified, and if they touch it, this happens and that happens and whatever, and I get them to work that way. I think from my side, the warm-up's just got to be part of the training, and it's a good place to get some extra work done that they might not think is extra work. And it's just a good way of, I'm not convinced that the warm-up is that beneficial for the immediate session. I think because we have, we do a warm-up then for each exercise and build from there. But I think the warm-up is a nice place to get some body awareness. I think it's sort of more those softer kind of fuzzier things body awareness, get them working on something that over 6 weeks we'll start to see a difference, 8 weeks we'll start to see a difference. And I think that is how I sort of frame my warm-up. But Rob, I don't feel like I've answered your question. I might have gone on a tangent there. What am I close, or do you want?
No, that's all right. No, it was just it was kind of a little bit of a kind of backtracking from my thoughts, really. Just when I mentioned how I got into thinking about a warm up because I was kind of chucked in the deep end because one of the guys wasn't there and I had to do it for the first team and had the piss taken out of me and things like that, which was interesting.
It's funny. Sorry.
Go on. No, go on.
It was funny, because one of the things that I take on about 10 interns a year, and I just hammer in from day one, and I never really thought about it, but what you say brings up a good point. So I make sure that every intern has some kind of default warm-up, and the idea behind that is exactly that, is that that is often the first time that you get to run a session. And it sets the tone for the rest of the session. And this definitely would have happened to every strength and conditioning coach. The coach said, "Hey, Rob, you've got 20 minutes to do a warm-up, and you plan this fantastic thing, and then their meeting goes for 17 minutes, and they go, oh, by the way, now you've only got 3 minutes." And so every intern that comes in has to be very well prepared on warm-ups, and we have, it's one of the first things we work on, is making sure that they can, run it. They can do it indoors, outdoors, in a static. So if it's raining outside and you're in the change rooms, they can do it that way. And I think from a coach's perspective, it 100% sets the tone. And whether it's for the game, for the match, for the competition, or just for training. And I think it's a vital thing to have.
I mean, just again, this is making me reflect, which is quite nice. When I think back to the kind of early days of me being thrust into the warm-ups, I look back and I think, how many variations of that kind of default that you talk about did I have? And in the early days, I don't think I had that many. And if I put myself in the athlete's shoes, I'd have been bored to death. Because I was nervous about them first team guys taking the piss out of my hair, taking the piss out of because I was lanky, taking the piss out of something. I just stuck to the default and didn't kind of almost dare move. And it just brought it back to a quote that one of the Italian players, who I think is playing New York, soccer players, wrote in his book and said the warm-up was the masturbation for the fitness coach. And it kind of, it made me think that is, from a player's point of view, that can definitely be seen as the case. And I look on the TV, and I've watched the team that I was working for, and the staff are still running that same warm-up, not mine, but their own. Really? And I just think, oh my God, if as an 18-year-old player, I'd have been thinking, this is the warm-up, this is just how it is. But if I was the 32, 33-year-old guy who was coming to the end of his career and was still in the same warm-up, I'd be walking off and just say, I'm doing my own thing. And it definitely does come across as the masturbation for the fitness coach, which is definitely worrying. So that was just kind of my thoughts. But I think
and the funny thing is, Rob, you can do so much with it. You can play games. Absolutely. You can be quite linear in it. You can be quite structured. You can. I have, anytime we run a warm up, as I get to know, especially in those football or team based things, I intersperse 30 seconds or 60 seconds for them to do whatever they want to do. Because I don't know what's tight. I don't know what's sort of hurting or what they've discovered while they started warming up. But again, you'll probably notice I much prefer the bottom up and get the athletes involved and get them engaged and educate them so they can actually make their own decisions than the sort of more traditional top down, this is how it should be done because, I've got my degree. And so, by infusing a bit of that kind of stuff in, it could be a lot of fun. And I think as S&C coaches, while we might be giving something that's scientifically valid and reliable, we've got to remember that our athletes are people first, and you've got to make it fun and exciting and something that they can actually enjoy and give them an opportunity to be engaged in.
No, definitely. And another thing was that the first team manager or first team coach or even youth team coach, more likely, was always there. So this has got to be structured. This has got to look like I'm in control. Everyone's doing something. Everyone's in a line. Everyone's doing this. Everyone's doing that.
Gotcha.
Because I probably thought if something to the opposite of that happens, they're going to think that the lads are running riot. But then on the flip side, the lads would love to do something like that. And this is making me cringe even more for the stuff that used to be done 5 or 6 years ago. And I'd love that as a player. So you go out and you don't know what's going to happen. Whereas with me, you were kind of 90% sure that what was the structure that was going to be put out for you. So I'm definitely reflecting on the warm up.
And again, a walk down amnesia lane. One of the things that happened is we're so interested in the science side of it and the physical side of it, but they need to improve their reactions and perception, and we need to identify, space or improve their skills and all that kind of stuff. And that's, you're 100% correct. And with those warm-ups and with those games that you could play, start off maybe with a bit of structure. And I understand this because, we've all gone through it where you're trying to as much impress the athletes as you are trying to impress the coach, I guess. But that chaos is what's going to happen the minute the warm-up finishes, because that's what they're going to hopefully go into, is a game or some kind of game-based conditioning or some kind of tactical thing or something like that. So we need to actually prepare them for that. Mm-hmm. And whereas many of us thinking purely physiological or physical, we do the structured warm-up and then say, oh, guys, by the way, go sprint, change direction, run, get off the ground, react, decide, perceive. And our warm-up is not actually preparing them for that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So just before I'm going to do a little roundup, Grant, and just ask you one more question regarding Perform, and just what was the thought behind that when you set up the website?
Setting up the website or setting up the name?
Yeah, the name if you want, but just the website and the blog and things. Is that just a place to kind of draw people to make them aware of the kind of things you do, or was it a separate entity within just in itself as a bit of an education for you to put your thoughts forward? What was the thought behind the blog?
So you got to understand. So I gave myself sort of 2 years to exit out of Tennis Australia, and I was just playing with a few things, and I only knew I was going to leave once I could pay the bills with external, consulting fees and all that kind of stuff. And I just needed a name. And where the name came from is we tried a million different things, but I wanted my Instagram, Twitter, and website to all be the same. So that's where the name came from. I just kept entering things, and then I'd find it was free on Twitter, but it was, there was a URL with it and then whatever. So there's nothing special about the name. But when it started off, it was literally just going to be a contents page. Sorry, not a contents page, a contact page. Mm-hmm. And it was just going to be something along the lines of, hey, if you need to contact me, or there it is, and an email, like a domain for an email address. So it'd just be Grant at whatever. And then I remember writing some thoughts down that I'd written for some other websites over the years. And I just put a collection of those on. And then we started to get, some kind of traction. It was more than just my mother reading the articles and you in the last 9 months. And so it just kind of went from there. And then, I've got Brendan Appleby. I asked him if he'd write an article, and he wrote something. And Ian McCowan was, I suppose, a number of guys that you've had on this podcast.
Yeah.
And what I wanted it to be is, from a coaching perspective, as much as I love that bottom up over the top down, but I also like the messiness, we plan this, but this is actually what happens. I like that nitty gritty, the sort of sinew, like really get down into the coaching. And the people that I was contacting are those kind of practitioners. There's no one really too sciencey, or they're just good people, good coaches with lots of runs on the board. And so we shared that, and it just became quite popular. And it was also just a place to get, a lot of the stuff that I put there is not backed by any peer-reviewed article. It's just like, hey, I did this, and for 10 years I did it wrong, and now I think it's a little bit better, so learn from my journey. And Rob, one of the reasons I take these 10 interns is I try to pass on some of that experience and knowledge as well. And it's just a sort of, hey, I had some really good mentors when I was younger, and people that I still reflect and contact and ask for advice for. So if I can provide some of that for someone else, I kind of feel like I'm maybe contributing a little bit.
So, nice.
As it turned out,
go on. Sorry, mate. Go on.
I was just going to say, as it turned out, it's also been really good because I work with a number of younger athletes. I can put articles there that are of questions that I'm being asked every day, and put it up there so that I can either, for further reading, flick that on, or if I'm so PropelPerform is the actual website is meant to be for coaches, athletes, and parents. Just things that happen every day. There's nothing too exciting about them, but it's all real stuff. And something that hopefully you can make you a better coach, athlete, or parent after reading a few of those articles.
Nice. Well, I was going to ask you where people can find you, but it's PropelPerform on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
We've changed. I have changed one little thing, and Instagram, we made it Propel Fit. So I've actually got two businesses now. And the reason is, and I think many of your listeners will appreciate this, I think there's a number of keyboard warriors who are on there and they hardly train anyone. And if they do train, it's a few housewives or whatever, but they talk up their game like they're working with elite athletes. And I never wanted that to happen. So we've got two distinct things, PropelPerform, and those are the athletes. If you see anyone wearing a PropelPerform shirt, it's because they are an athlete. They're competing on a regular basis. And then I've got Propel Fit, which is for my general population, and also where I do the rehab kind of stuff for non-athletes. And so Instagram just happened to be Propel Fit, and Twitter stayed PropelPerform. But
nice.
That's that was the thinking behind it, is to say, hey, you know what, I'm quite comfortable training boot camps and all that kind of stuff. And I also feel just as comfortable working with some elite athletes. But I understand that what I provide is going to be for specific to that population.
Brilliant. Well, I'm just going to do a little roundup, as I said I'd do a couple minutes ago, and just thank you for your time. And it was good to chat. And sorry about the mix-up at the start with my dodgy mic.
Rob, absolute pleasure. And it's been quite a bit of fun. And obviously, I've listened to a number of the podcasts, so it feels like quite an honor to. Is this 106 or something? Would that be close?
It'll be somewhere around there, 106, 107, something like that. Yeah, depending on how other things turn out. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah,
so you just following Darren, actually, just a couple after Darren. Darren's part 2.
Yeah.
But don't mention his name again.
Insult me like that. And Darren spent a bit of time in Brisbane, and he presented. I run a thing called the Junior Sports Science Symposium, and he was really good in that presenting to a lot of the parents of my athletes. So I don't mind mocking him.
Absolutely not. Deserves a bit of it. Right, mate. Well, let's keep in touch, and thanks again for your time.
Awesome.
And we'll speak soon.
All right, awesome, Rob. Thanks very much.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for tuning in to episode 107 of the Pacey Performance Podcast. So as always, I always make sure that I thank the sponsors for sponsoring the episode today in Coach Me Plus and Val Performance. But the biggest thanks should go to you guys and the guys that tune in every week, and even those that dip in and out. So just thanks to you guys for your continued support. So if you are enjoying the podcast, be sure to jump over to iTunes and leave an honest rating and review. It all goes to help spread the word of the podcast. So thanks a lot again for your support, and I will speak to you again in episode 108.